UMass and Amherst Departments of History, Theater, Legal Studies, Women's Studies, Creative Writing, and Special Collections and Archives. It was made possible by a generous grant from the College of Humanities and Fine Arts Visioning Grant. At this point in time, we would like to ask you to turn off all cell phones, beepers, or any other electronic devices that might cause a distraction during the performance. Also, if you have any hard candies or cough drops or anything like that, if you could take those out and unwrap them at this time, that would be great. We would also like to give special thanks to Bill and Joni Baird, without whose tireless efforts we could not have made this project. So thank you, Bill and Joni. And I would also like to thank our fearless leader, Joyce Berkman, for producing this endeavor. So thank you, Joyce. Bill Baird is an activist for reproductive rights whose tireless efforts throughout the 1960s and 1970s culminated in the Supreme Court case Baird v. Eisenstadt in 1972 that gave every American, regardless of marital status, the right to have birth control. It is his story that you're going to see tonight, as well as the story of the movement that he championed. We want to emphasize this is not a finished product. We are doing a staged reading to get a sense of how this play works in front of an audience. So there will be things that you like tonight, we hope, and there may also be things that seem a little rough to you, and that's okay. We're trying to gauge that from this reading and hopefully make the play a better play. We'd also like to point out that while the play is more or less a work of nonfiction, some of the things have been changed a little bit to fit the dramatic structure that we created. So bear that in mind. And with your program, you should have received a yellow card asking you to support our efforts to upgrade our facilities. So please take a moment to look over this information and consider making a donation. And finally, the show will run for approximately an hour, and then we'll take a 10-minute intermission, after which we will have a discussion of some of the issues raised by the play. We will have our lovely producer, Joyce Berkman, on the panel, as well as Laura Lovett, a professor from the history department who has special expertise in reproductive rights. And also, Mr. Bill Baird himself will answer some of your questions and share his viewpoints on the issue and his perspective of the reproductive rights movement. So thank you so much for coming, and please enjoy the show.
Only 4 years ago, in 1963, I was at Harlem Hospital. I heard a woman screaming, the kind of screaming where if you heard it, you knew someone was in great pain. I raced out into the corridor. It was very poorly lit, and I saw a young woman, a young mother. I found out later she was 29 years old, the mother of 8. A young black woman. She staggered down the hallway. She had a piece of coat hanger sticking out of her uterus. I could see she was covered in blood. It was as if someone had thrown a can of red paint. It was all over her body. I caught her as she fell to the floor, and I remember her, the way she looked, what she said to me. She was, as she bled, expressing concern about her children. She pled with us to take care of her children because she knew she was dying. By that time, the doctors and the nurses came around, but there was nothing they could do. She bled to death in my arms. It is 2008. I am 76. I have been telling this story for 40 years. What angered me then, as it does now, is that this young woman, this young mother, did not have the legal right to birth control. That's right. Not only did she not have the right to an abortion, but she could not even legally get contraception.
Tubes, tables, whitewashed windows, grime from age. gaze wiped over once.
Legs spread, anxious.
Eyes crawling up on me. Eyes rolling in my thighs.
Metal horses gnawing my womb. Dead mice fall from my mouth.
I really didn't mean to. I really didn't think I could.
Just one day off. Get off of me. All this blood, bones shattered like soft ice cream cones.
For colored girls who have considered suicide when the rainbow was enough. By Intozaki Shange.
I was born in 1981, Mom. 8 years after Roe versus Wade, when the Supreme Court ruled that the right to privacy includes the right to terminate a pregnancy.
You were born in 1981, 9 years after Baird versus Eisenstadt. You know about Roe. Do you know about Baird? That case legalized the dissemination of birth control to all people.
Almost 100 years before that, in 1891, the Supreme Court ruled that
no right is held more sacred or is more carefully guarded than the right of every individual to the possession and control of his person, free from all restraint or interference.
But still, when my mother was in college in 1967,
It was illegal for me, as a single woman, to purchase or to even learn about contraception.
she told me about this time. Now, it must have been about the mid-1960s. She visited a family planning clinic in the back of a converted UPS truck. It was made up to look like the inside of the living room.
It belonged to an activist named Bill Baird. He taught about birth control and abortion before it was legal to do that. He helped anyone, no matter who they were or how much money they had. There was a sign inside with the words,
To be wanted and loved is the birthright of every child.
The 1960s. All you hear now is free love and make love, not war, and the hippies and the protesters. But the reason that they were making news was those were the activists, the troublemakers. The culture of the time was much more conservative than what it's made out to be now, especially in Massachusetts.
I missed my period in 1967. I had to go to the school health clinic to ask for a pregnancy test, but they weren't even allowed to advise me. In 1967, there was a pervasive double standard about sexuality. The sexual revolution was really a sexual revolution for men. Women were still held to the conservative standards. In Massachusetts, it was legal for a man to go downtown and buy condoms, but it was completely illegal for a woman who was not married to have any type of birth control.
1967.
To the editor, my dorm, Arnold House, has recently initiated yet another of its fear-inspiring punishments for delinquent dorm mates. Anyone who forgets to initial the sign-off sheet at curfew must now pay 5 cents. If the girls' dormitories are to remain consistent in their policies, they should always treat us as children, because paying a fine is clearly too adult. Let them continue protecting us and molding our character, but let me keep my nickel, because I'd rather be spanked. Gina Correa, class of 68. As house mother, the policy when a girl does not return after waiting 1 hour and a half after curfew. 1, the dean of women is called. 2, the parents are called. 3, the police are called. And 4, I wait up until the girl returns or is located.
If part of the university's reason for imposing a curfew on girls is for fear that they will be either attacked or molested, let me point out that there is no earthly reason why they couldn't be attacked before midnight. And if this is not part of the reason for curfew, why don't the boys have a curfew also? Or instead, the political platform at Umass should be a separation of sex and state.
It is my firm belief that no law, no matter how right its intent, should invade the sanctity of a couple's bedroom to dictate what is right and what is wrong. The strength of our nation is based on the strength of the family unit. What I'm attempting to do is show people how to make the family unit stronger by controlling its size.
When the nurse told me I was pregnant, first she looked at me with disapproval. Then she said she had to call my parents. Of course I panicked. I thought quickly. I told the nurse I was planning on marrying my boyfriend and that we wanted to tell our parents ourselves.
And they bought it.
They let me leave without calling. But I thought I'd be kicked out of school. The dean of women's students took a poll in my dorm to find out if it would be too distracting to have me around. A pregnant student. 5 years earlier, and they would have just expelled me. It was a sign of the changing attitudes, but I felt terrible. I just wanted an education.
In 1965, I was 32 years old. I had been teaching birth control classes for free in these different neighborhoods, in Harlem or Roxbury in Boston. I went to different areas, poor, tough neighborhoods. 1 week I went to Hempstead, Long Island, 1 week after Dr. King had spoken there. on the same corner. I'd go and I'd hand out flyers, and people would say, come teach in our buildings. So I'd go, and it would be packed, just full of people. But it was against the law, you know? And I'd come back the next week, and the superintendent would say, get out of here, you can't do this anymore. Sometimes he'd say, my priest says I'll burn in hell if I let you use this room again. That's when I got the idea of the van. A moving classroom. People could just come inside and learn. I could bring it to them. I purchased a 25-foot van, and I called it the Plan Van. I thought there's got to be more than this ugly van. I turned the inside of it into what looked like a living room. I even had a fireplace in there.
He was from a working class background, and he made it a point to go into poor neighborhoods and reach out to the residents. At some point, he had been a pugilist, but he became a pacifist. He was a white activist going into African-American neighborhoods. He was a man fighting for women's health.
Wait, why? Why would somebody work so hard for a group that they aren't even a part of?
1965, Bill Baird's Plan Van.
Thanks for coming. My name's Bill Baird. I'm not a professor, not a doctor. I'm a certified health ed teacher and the medical director at a pharmaceutical company. And I think women having control over their own reproduction is important. I'm not going to talk down to you. I want us to talk with each other. I want you to tell me what you know. I'll share what I know. Let's see if we can get through these things that face us all.
You're poor. You gotta be creative, all right? You can take Q-tips and bobby pins, straighten them out, and try and snake that inside.
You can use knitting needles.
Or a plastic tube.
A catheter?
Please, I can't afford a catheter. I went to this tropical fish store. They got this plastic tubing that costs about 15 cents. You take that, a piece of copper wire, so you can bend the tube to the shape that you want.
Right here, in this country, 10,000 women die a year from botched abortions.
It was 1967. I was pregnant, and leaving school was still a real possibility. I couldn't talk to my mother, or at least I didn't think I could. And I had a friend, a classmate, Ray Mungo. He was the editor of the student newspaper at the time and a passionate, committed activist. I remember he invited an abortion rights person to talk. It was Bill Baird. I was in trouble, and I wasn't sure what to do. Ray told me Bill was coming to Boston University to test the law, and everyone was going to see him. I remember it was the spring, and the blossoms were just opening on the trees. Boston was coming back to life. The snow was gone, and the rain was had washed away the winter dirt, and it looked fresh and new. I went down to the student union, and it was packed. Even before I got there, I could hear the crowd. Some students were chanting, and a lot of people were talking. You could tell they were primed for something exciting. It was riveting, and the momentum of the crowd moved me faster towards that student union. The police were all over the place, and Ray was introducing Bill.
1967, Boston University Student Union.
Has fought tirelessly and successfully as an advocate for women's reproductive rights. He's risked his life and been thrown in jail numerous times for the cause. His work has helped New York to change their outdated laws. He is a warrior of social justice and a warrior of freedom. The world has been moved and changed by remarkable leaders, Mahatma Gandhi, Dr. King, and Malcolm X among them. And here today, among the pantheon of figures changing American culture, we welcome another remarkable crusader to challenge Massachusetts' own archaic laws. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Bill Baird.
No government, no religion, no parent or boyfriend or husband has the right to impose an unwanted pregnancy on a woman if she does not want it.
Yeah.
Her right of privacy must be absolute in being able to access birth control and abortion help. I've come a long way at the invitation of your courageous editor, Ray Mungo, and 667 people who signed a petition requesting that I challenge the following law.
Crimes against chastity, morality, decency, and good order.
Chapter 272.
Section 2021A.
Anyone who prints,
Publishes.
Exhibits or give any information about any means whatsoever to cause an abortion or to prevent a pregnancy.
Or gives away any such device.
Will be guilty of a felony, facing upwards of 5 years in prison for each act.
And is subjected to a $1,000 fine.
If you mug someone, the penalty is 1 to 3 years. But if you exhibit birth control and abortion devices, you can go to jail for 5 years as a convicted felon for each act. How can one consider the birth control pill obscene? I think it is obscene to see pictures of people being blown up in Vietnam, a war we have no right to be in.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've protested the deaths of 8,000 men annually these last 2 years in Vietnam. But right here, in our own country, 10,000 women die each year at the hands of quack abortionists.
What are you saying? Are you saying that abortion is more important than the war?
You think your war is saving people? It's not. There is no purpose to this war. It's a foolish disrespect for life.
Disrespect for life. The most hallowed thing a person can do is defend their country.
There is no defense of the Vietnam War. And there is no defense for women dying needlessly each year in our own country, where our real efforts should be.
All this talk about the war, he must know it'll make the police mad. They all support the war effort.
Hell, yes, he knows it'll make them mad. He's provoking them. He's trying to get arrested. If he can get the Supreme Court to hear his case, they'll acknowledge that this crimes against chastity stuff is unconstitutional. It violates the right to privacy.
I think it is obscene to see little children hungry and starving to death. I think it is obscene that women lay dead on hotel room floors from coat hanger abortions.
I'm a college freshman here. Sure, abortion's illegal, but it's a common thing. When I graduated high school last year, I knew of 6 girls in my class alone who had had one. Their parents had paid for it to be done quietly. They had to say they were crazy.
Every woman either knows someone who's had an abortion or has had one herself.
I had one last year. I sold almost everything I owned, including my winter coat.
I borrowed money from family members to pay the $600 cost of my abortion. My first job, a few years later, and as a college graduate, paid an annual salary of $4,000.
Colonial and post-colonial common law in the U.S. held that human life began at the time of fetal movement or quickening. All through the first half of the 19th century, it was common to see in the newspapers advertisements to help fix blockage of the menses.
Tablets guaranteed to ease interruption of menses.
The return of regularity.
French periodical pills.
These products cut into doctors' pockets, and so the medical community pushed to outlaw them.
This soon caught on state to state. After that, the quickening designation began to fade from common use. In its place, there was a now of division between criminal and so-called therapeutic abortions, which were only allowed to preserve the health of the mother.
Oh, don't tell me about these therapeutic abortions. You mean the ones that can be bought. If you had the money, you can get an abortion, at least a legal one. But that's only if you had the money and the connections. If you had the money, you could just buy a psychiatric referral. They'd say you had something like psychosis of pregnancy,
Depressive neuroses, transient situational disturbance.
At Massachusetts General Hospital, we call it acute situational anxiety of pregnancy. That's the justification we use most frequently. Though our abortions are usually performed when something is physically wrong, a good fifth of these therapeutic abortions are performed for psychiatric reasons. You can bet some doctors are getting a kickback for that.
Return to 1965 plan van.
Harlem Hospital's where we go. Beth Israel, right off Fifth Avenue, that's known for rich people. You've got to show up with a letter from 3 doctors, with one being a psychiatrist, and they all know each other. They'll say to these rich women, these doctors will say, "You're going to talk about committing suicide? We'll believe you. We'll sign all 3 of us to save your life. You got the abortion plus a fancy hospital paid for by insurance." Poor women, Harlem Hospital says, "Oh yeah, you're bleeding. Better get to the ER, we'll take care of you right away."
The game that's played, all right, is you take a piece of coat hanger, maybe 6, 7, 8 inches long, and wrap the end with tape to dump the blunt in sharpness. You hold it fast to your uterus so you'll start bleeding. Then if you can get to Harlem Hospital in time it right, the doctors will say, "Oh, you're bleeding." It's the only way it's legal. They'll do the abortion then to save your life.
But if you're not so smart and you don't get there in time, you're dead.
Dr. Alan Guttmacher, the national president of Planned Parenthood, said today,
Bill Baird has been over-enthusiastic in taking it upon himself to teach about birth control, and even distributing it. Every couple should see a physician. Only doctors can talk to their patients about birth control. That's what we believe. That's what makes sense. Every couple should see a physician.
What an elitist. Only doctors can teach about birth control? Why not social workers? Why not nurses? Why not anyone who can learn about physiology? I believe in bending laws, because if the laws don't represent the people, they don't help the people. I do not believe in this law.
So do you think that you're above the law?
No, I don't think I'm above the law. The law is below the people.
Unjust laws exist. Shall we be content to obey them, or shall we endeavor to amend them and obey them until we have succeeded, or shall we transgress them at once? From Civil Disobedience by Henry David Thoreau. Men generally, under such a government as this, think that they ought to wait until they have persuaded the majority to alter them. They think that if they should resist, the remedy would be worse than the evil. But it is the fault of the government itself that the remedy is worse than the evil. It makes it worse. Why is it not more apt to anticipate and provide for reform? Why does it not encourage its citizens to be on the alert, to point out its faults, and do better than it would have them?
With Berry versus Eisenstadt, it became legal for all women, whether they were married or single, to have access to birth control. It changed the way single women were treated.
So, Bill Baird was a hero in a sense.
This case went to the Supreme Court. He took many cases to the Supreme Court. I respect him for that. But do I think he alone deserves the credit? He certainly wasn't the only one fighting for the cause.
For me to show up with my van, a white man in a predominantly black neighborhood, I wasn't welcome, not at first. Flo Kennedy, the famous black feminist attorney and my dear friend, came to Roxbury with me once. We didn't realize it was the day of the coordinated rebellion that had started in Chicago. Bring the war home! People were throwing rocks, jumping in front of my van, smashing windows. Flo said,
They're going to kill you, Bill. You're a white man.
"They're not going to kill me, Flo." I wasn't sure I believed it. Later on, I managed to park the van to start a lesson. A young black man came in late.
Birth control and abortion are the white man's plan for genocide of black people. You're not wanted here.
But then this older woman, she just took her hand and she went whack! And she slammed him up against the wall of the van. She said,
He's our friend. You get out of here.
he left, and I never saw him again. Flo said,
The people in our neighborhoods need your help. The mothers across the state need it.
and people did come. Lots of people came. The van would hold maybe 30 or 40 people. I would try to figure out how I could get everyone out in 15 or 20 minutes because there were people waiting outside. Some wanted birth control information. Some were there for abortions because they hadn't had access to birth control. Often, it would be 3 in the morning until we had helped the last person.
Return to Boston University.
I have a goal in my speaking here today at Boston University. My goal is to get this case heard by the United States Supreme Court. Massachusetts has the toughest law in the entire nation. It's the only state remaining where it's a felony to distribute and educate people about birth control. If the Supreme Court upholds my challenge to this law, then it will legalize the right to birth control nationwide for unmarried people, and it would be the foundation for reversing the abortion laws. I will now test the law. This is a coat hanger. Women take the hanger after feeling inside their vagina for a little bump called the cervix. Taking about an 8-inch piece of it, they snake it into their uterus through the opening of the cervix. They then try to dislodge the embryo. Their target is the size of about a ½ an inch at 8 weeks, and at 10 weeks, 1.5 inches long. Do you know what this is? It's a douching bag. Women who are desperate take Kirk and Brown laundry soap, chop it into little pieces, and make a heavy, soapy solution. I have personally witnessed hundreds of poor mothers and students who attempt to abort pregnancies with homemade remedies, and at times commit suicide.
My roommate at Smith College sophomore year, Deborah. About halfway through the first semester, she started acting strangely. She wouldn't leave the room for days in a row, and was always crying. I felt so bad for her, but anytime I tried to talk, to try to find out what was bothering her, she shut down. She'd never say. She'd only hint in a cryptic way. I couldn't figure it out. I tried to get her to talk to someone, a professional, but I don't think she ever did. She hardly moved from the room, and she wouldn't tell me. Then I got a call one morning. She'd gone down to the hardware store, bought a hank of rope, went out to the woods on the edge of campus, and hung herself. In the autopsy, they found out she was pregnant. A little Catholic girl who was so conflicted that she couldn't even talk to me about it. She was my best friend.
From November 1968 by Adrian Rich. How you broke open what sheathed you. Until this moment, I know nothing about it. My ignorance of you amazes me now that I watch you starting to give yourself away to the wind.
I've seen enough suffering in the name of religion. 2/3 of my patients at the abortion clinic in New York are Catholics. 3 of them have been nuns. Those religious and political leaders who oppose abortion rights, such as Monsignor Nutt, are frauds. They believe God is on their side, even as they rob women of their freedom and dignity and would have them be chattel.
Despite popular opinion to the contrary, the attitude of the Catholic Church towards contraception is still one of a condemnation of a moral evil. It hasn't changed.
I don't believe, and never have, that it's the church's duty to tell me how many children I should have.
It's
The church won't pay for them. The church is not going to send them to college.
It's 2008.
I'd taken a home pregnancy test, and it came out positive. So I needed a second opinion. And I called Planned Parenthood, but I couldn't get an appointment for 3 days, and at that point I just needed to know right away, so I could figure out what to do. Well, there's this place near where I work, a crisis pregnancy center. And I knew that they were pro-life, and that they would put a lot of pressure on me, but I thought, I won't really have to talk to them. I can just be polite and get what I came for. Well, while I was waiting, I read these brochures that they had that looked just like informational packets that they give out at the doctor's office. I think they wanted to have some sort of medical air about the whole thing, except that these ones talked about how some women can never psychologically recover from an abortion, or can't be good mothers, or are suicidal. And when the woman confirmed that I was pregnant, behind her on the wall, there was this poster of the fetus in each stage of the development, except that over the face of the fetus, they had posted these little cartoon faces with googly eyes and word bubbles, so that the fetus were looking at me and saying things like, "Hi, Mommy, I can't wait to meet you." I mean, they seem to be willfully obscuring real information, or, I don't know, trying to force me into an emotional position about my experience. And I mean, what if I didn't feel like it was a complicated issue? What if I didn't feel guilty? What if all I felt was relief? Relief at having a choice, a safe choice.
All women have a right to reproductive autonomy, but none of the Supreme Court cases guarantee that, since the state and Congress control access. Women of color and poor women find themselves without access to contraception or abortion, and without access to the resources required if they want to have the child. I have had women come to me and tearfully disclose how their husband or boyfriend held them against the wall and repeatedly punched them in the abdomen out of love in an attempt to abort them, or have even violently pushed them down a flight of stairs to do the same. Women may take 2 bottles of castor oil and drink them, thinking they will abort. They usually get cramping and a massive case of diarrhea, but usually remain pregnant. Do any of you recognize this tube? This is called a catheter. It takes a fair amount of skill to snake this catheter into the uterus. Because it is a foreign body, the uterus will contract to expel it. Often the developing embryo will be expelled.
I sold everything I had to get that money together. A guy picked us up in a sedan and he blindfolded us so we couldn't see where we were going.
This label says turpentine. Women often drink this and die.
I had what I felt was a safe abortion, even though it was illegal. This was 1966, actually. I was a freshman in college. Well, the day after the procedure, I was resting, and I suddenly had the most incredible pain I'd ever felt. It just shot right up through my leg and into my lower back, and I Felt like all my guts were going to fall out. I was hemorrhaging. I called a friend and she got me to Mass General as fast as she could, and I underwent emergency surgery. But the next day, the doctor came in and he gave me this long, cold look.
You're not going to tell me where you went?
No.
You're not going to tell me who did this?
No.
I suppose you know I can have you arrested.
Yes.
But I'm not going to. I'm going to prescribe you birth control pills. I might as well. You're ruined.
University Health Services should be ready to help the unmarried girl student in making the diagnosis of pregnancy as early as possible, in order to give her as much time as possible to consider alternate plans.
In a recent poll conducted by Mademoiselle, we asked readers, how do you feel about giving birth control pills to girls in college? Do you approve or disapprove?
It only condones illicit behavior. It shows a moral decline in our country. It gives young people an easy way out.
I'm definitely opposed to this. Our young people have too much freedom now.
And why should we foster promiscuity?
Crimes against chastity, morality, decency, and good order.
If the pills are distributed, who will marry?
Preventing dissemination of birth control information or devices to unmarried women is like burning witches. What are they really protecting against? Who benefits from this?
Crimes against chastity.
Crimes against unmarried women's chastity, you mean? Unmarried men can buy contraception without being punished.
Wait, why was it like burning witches?
It was a way of placing blame on someone for the changing times.
So they blamed the women?
Unmarried women were their scapegoats. A young woman's virtue was the most valuable thing about her. So those who weren't outwardly pure, the ones, for example, who got pregnant, were ostracized. This, coupled with the lack of access to contraception, put women in an impossible situation.
But what about the men?
Young women were in charge of preventing sex. If men were having sex, it was the fault of the women.
Has anyone ever visited Long Island? Ever used the Long Island Railroad?
Yep.
Well, from time to time, they advertise how great their time schedule is with ads that say, "We pull out on time." How many of you women have been told by a man, "Hey, Mary, we'll take a chance tonight," and he encourages you to use withdrawal? Where does the "we" come in? I've never seen a pregnant male. To give you an idea of how the odds are stacked against women, how many sperm are released during intercourse?
5,000?
I've asked this question numerous times in my lectures coast to coast. There are 500,000 sperm. Any of you play basketball? You dribble before you shoot.
They'll arrest him now, the way he's goading them.
But look,
They've got to.
But look at the police officers. They're frozen in position.
These are full-page ads for MCO foam, a contraceptive. You can fill out the attached coupon on the bottom, which anyone can do, even a 12-year-old. If you send the package to the main headquarters in St. Louis, within a short time, you will receive a free package of foam via the U.S. Post Office. Officers, I have clearly violated this law. I have exhibited abortion and birth control devices. I've given out information on them. It is not your job to determine the morality of what I'm doing, but whether or not I have broken the law.
I guess they'll do what they want to in their own good time.
I purchased these items from Zayre's department store. MCO contraceptive foam, contraceptive cream, contraceptive jelly, condoms. If anyone wants this, I will give it to you for free. It is your right to do with them as you see fit.
When Bill Baird started handing out contraception, it was a rush of people. I wanted to go up and speak to him, but there was such a crowd. Ray pushed me to go. I went up to Bill, and the noise of the crowd was overwhelming. He was on stage, and I had to yell to be heard. Mr. Baird? I'm in trouble. I'm just a student, and my family won't help. Can you help me? And this, I won't forget. He turned, and he looked at me. Must have been 3 seconds, but it felt much longer. And then, on a loose piece of paper, he wrote down a number and handed it to me.
I was careful to only give out numbers, not names. Giving names for someone getting thrown in jail.
He took the time to write down a number that altered my life. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath, but when he handed me that number, It was relief all over.
My name is Lieutenant Joseph Jordan, Vice Squad, Police Chief. You're under arrest for violating law, Chapter 272.
Vice Squad? They normally arrest prostitutes.
I want you to be aware that as evidence, I hold before you a receipt from the Zayre's department store for MCO foam showing the cost of $3 with a 9% sales tax. If you arrest me for giving out this foam, you must arrest Attorney General Quinn for collecting an illegal sales tax on an illegal sale. I was told the American Civil Liberties Union would be here. If I'm going to be arrested, I need legal representation. Is the ACLU here? Is anyone here from the ACLU? I don't want to be in the cops' possession inside a police car. They'll say he tried to escape and we had to beat him. Is anyone here from the ACLU? Please, stand up. I need you now.
I am. James Hamilton from the ACLU. I will help you.
3 weeks later, the ACLU said
We don't think the case holds any constitutional merits.
they would not represent me.
Courthouse.
At police headquarters, Bill Baird is charged with dispensing contraceptives illegally.
I'm not giving you publicity on this case. If you want to challenge the constitutionality of the law, you're not doing it in my court. I'm moving you right up to the Superior Court. You will have a May 8th hearing. Mr. Baird, how do you plead?
Your Honor, I am standing trial for 10 years of my life, and a multi-million-dollar department store chain is able to sell contraceptives without any penalty. These laws are archaic, barbaric. The people who can afford to get an illegal abortion, legislators' daughters, wives, they get taken care of. The laws punish poor people for being poor.
How do you plead?
Unmarried women on state financial relief, they're going to get pregnant. They'll have a baby next year and the year after. They can't afford access to birth control like the wealthy who can buy their way around the laws. The legislators, they're cowardly and foolish. I sought to be arrested to get into court and end this silly game. If I win, the state saves $3 million it would have spent on welfare. If I lose, I get a 10-year sentence.
Mr. Baird, how do you plead?
Not guilty, Your Honor.
Ray Mungo called the ACLU and said they needed someone. I wasn't expecting there to be so many people. And then the police and people started yelling. It wasn't what I imagined. I was used to helping people after they'd been arrested, not watching the crime unfold. How was I to defend against it? I didn't stand up at first because I thought maybe someone else had come. There was some interest in our office. I knew someone else had to have gone, and I thought maybe someone else will say it first. Someone else will do it. But no one did. So I did. The case, it wasn't the right time. He was baiting the police. We felt there wasn't enough there, certainly not enough to make it to the Supreme Court.
Bill Baird has been found guilty today. He plans to appeal the decision.
I know I'll win on appeal. The law doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell of being declared constitutional.
The Planned Parenthood Association has avoided lending its prestige to Baird's historic legal challenge. In official publications, Dr. Alan Guttmacher, head of Planned Parenthood, has gone out of his way to disassociate the organization from Baird.
Our lawyers tell us, and we agree, that the only way to liberalize the current law is through the process of filing a bill in the legislature and working for its passage. Due to our tax deductibility, we cannot get involved in propaganda or legislature. Were Mr. Baird able to get a member of the state legislature to file a bill for consideration, we would still not be able to support him, even under those circumstances. I admit the abortion laws are idiotic, punitive, and hard, but I hope the laws will be changed by evolution and not by revolution.
The abortion law must be changed by revolution. Tell Dr. Guttmacher to explain to an 18-year-old girl who has been raped to wait for evolution. Here, the rape penalized her. And now carrying an unwanted pregnancy forced on her by a barbaric act must penalize her again? Women have been dominated by man-made rules for too damn long.
Equally disturbing has been the silence, and in some cases, the obstruction of the clergy in Massachusetts.
Father John Keene, A priest and one of my most vocal challengers is so brazen to say publicly that if a woman used abortion, he would call for the death penalty, along with her husband or boyfriend. And for a woman wearing an IUD, he would call for an arrest of carrying a concealed weapon. You laugh. If I were a woman, that would terrify me. Do you hear the seriousness of what I'm saying?
He has been sentenced for a felony in Boston and will serve his time in the Charles Street jail. He said that the DA's office felt that.
I'm such an evil force to society that the only safe place for me is in jail.
You will spend the next 3 months in Boston, in the Charles Street jail.
Charles Street Jail.
I had heard about the Charles Street Jail. In the shadows of Harvard and MIT, a stone's throw away from Boston Museum of Science, Mass General, Beacon Hill. 2 totally different societies, separated by some walls and wire. I'd heard about it, how the prisoners ran the place, how they threw everyone in together, the child molesters, murderers, rapists, in with the rest of the population. Hardly one ray of natural light entered that building. My cell was 5 by 8. The mattress was full of blood stains. The inmate before me had cut his wrist. They didn't clean anything. There was no toilet, just a cement bowl. The cell bar at the bottom had a little square where they would shove the food like you see at the zoo to feed the animals. I was alone in the cell. When they let me out for a shower, that was the most dangerous time. Outside my cell, they were stacked 3 tiers high. There was a railing about 2 feet tall. People jumped over. Guards and inmates were thrown over. Every day, I would wait for some sort of food at 7 a.m. Gruel, we called it, like oatmeal paste. I would find bugs in it, live bugs. I would find little pebbles in it. Lunch, usually a bologna sandwich at 11, supper at 4 p.m. No other food until 15 hours later at 7. This one guy was in for murder. He killed his mother. He had been on an LSD trip and thought his mother was the devil. He used to get ice cream, little squares. He knew someone that worked in the kitchen, and he gave them to me. I lived on that ice cream. There were people in there teaching people how to rob a bank better, how to pick a lock better. It was actually a crime school. And people would say, "Bill, you don't belong in here." And I'd say, "Tell that to the judge." The guy next to me was seriously mentally ill. He took off his wedding ring and he threw it on the ground. He said, "I don't deserve a wife. God is punishing me." Well, I can't punish me. I am God. The threat of the inmates was always very real. Because people who were in there were usually sick. You murder somebody, you're usually sick. Guards were always accusing inmates of having drugs. They'd say, "We hear there are some drugs in here, take your clothes off." Or they'd bring us downstairs, and they would ram their fingers inside of our bodies, pretended to feel for drugs, to hurt us, to humiliate us. And no one cared. While I was there, an inmate set the prison on fire. If you want to know panic, know that you have a really good chance of being burned to death. An inmate in a padded cell had taken the padding off the wall and into the middle of the cell, smuggled in a match somehow, set it on fire, and jumped into it. The cellmate next to me was screaming at me, "I didn't tell you to put out any fire. You couldn't put out any fire without my permission." We had little tin cups for water. But also, if someone was being raped or stabbed, we were supposed to take that cup and bang it against the cell bars, and that would alert the guards to come running over. Imagine this. Hundreds of inmates smelling burning flesh, and they're banging their cups. Some did it hard, some did it soft. There were waves of sound. I was released temporarily to appeal my case. If I lost my appeal, then I'd have to go back to jail. I knew I had to do something about what was going on, but if I attacked the guards and lost my appeal and returned to jail, I would not survive a day, because the guards had all the power. So I picketed the prison. That's what I know how to do. I fight for causes, and it's what I was born to do. I said the conditions were horrible, the food, the bugs, the inmates, the abuse that was going on, but I did not attack the guards. It inspired a revolt by the inmates. They conducted a sit-in. Shortly after that, a federal judge investigated, signed himself in. He lasted 1 day, and he said, no more. They closed down the jail. I was there for 35 days. Rabbi Albert S. Goldstein.
The man who is doing more for this Commonwealth than any scientist, clergyman, educator, legislator, or agitator is that much vilified, widely unappreciated moral gadfly, Bill Baird.
I think I've contributed something of significance to the freedom of millions of women. But now, society says it doesn't want to know me. Believe it or not, I wake up in the night and I think, could I be wrong and everyone else right? Could I be the devil? Sometimes you feel like death is on your shoulder.
He cannot rid himself of the charge that he is diabolical and a peddler of death.
He recognizes no permanent or objective moral standards except his own version of what he calls freedom.
He's a troublemaker who should stay in New York and stay out of our business.
Mr. Baird doesn't live here, and some folks hold even that against him. The prophet Amos wasn't a native of Bethel, and Jesus wasn't born in Jerusalem. They took it upon themselves to travel far in order to stir things up, and hopefully to clean things up. It is a sad commentary on humankind that prophets and saints are canonized only after they are dead. We ought not to wait until Bill is buried to recognize the very special quality of this man who, like Jeremiah and Paul, is willing to risk jail, vile insult, and assassination threats because he insists that we do not render unto Caesar the right to intrude into the most intimate and sacred of personal relationships.
Dr. James Collins of Meadowbrook Hospital said,
There is definitely no demand for birth control information. In fact, the 4 horsemen, famine, pestilence, disease, and war, have been, and I think will continue to be, a more or less balanced agent for controlling population size.
So you see, no demand for birth control
The
information.
people in the street whom I talk with personally, and the hundreds of letters I receive, many from Roman Catholics, are strongly in favor of my efforts to change this law. The reality is that the people want to change, but the legislators accept the myth that the religious opposition is too strong. I wish that somehow I could give the legislators the courage to do what is their responsibility.
Definitely no demand.
Dear Mr. Baird, please forgive me for writing to you, but I need your help desperately. Can you tell me how and where I can get the necessary information and assistance, either in New Jersey or New York or Puerto Rico if need be? Any help that you can give me will be so greatly appreciated.
Dear Mr. Baird, on February 19th, I read an article in the New York News about your opinion of abortion. I find that I am in need of information concerning it. I've consulted a physician, but because of the oath he has taken, he cannot advise me of a doctor or a hospital in the New York area who is willing to perform this operation. If you can possibly advise me on the above, I would be tremendously grateful. If you cannot, perhaps you know of other countries outside the U.S. where these operations are done legally and with whom I may contact there. I cannot express the total desperation I feel at this time, and any information you can give me will help.
When women come to me and ask for help, I say, sure, I'll help. But if I do, you must write 3 letters to your legislators demanding that they work to change the law. Reproductive freedom is a fundamental right. Every man and woman must stand up for it. I'm not fighting alone.
For years, he has been preaching that it is presumptuous and insufferable for any governmental agency to rule whether you or my wife or I use a contraceptive and which kind. This is nobody's business, but nobody's except yours, hers, and mine. He has been preaching that it is immoral and unendurable for anybody at all, except the woman herself to decide whether she will tolerate a foreign growth in her body or have it medically removed. Citizens of Massachusetts have an utterly unique opportunity, unprecedented in history, to canonize a living prophet saint. Are we spiritually big and worthy enough to rise to the challenge?
In 1966, the window of Bill Baird's planned van was smashed with a rock. It was the first reported case of anti-choice violence.
A firebomb was thrown against the window of the Jewish Community Center in Bedford, Mass. Just 10 minutes before abortion advocate Bill Baird was to deliver a lecture there last night. The controversial lecturer and founder of the Parent Aid Clinic on Long Island said he was in the foyer of the building when the firebomb struck against the window and burned the window frames.
They sent letters saying they would hang my 5-year-old daughter. My wife and 4 kids were getting death threats. I was forced to move them hundreds of miles away, where I thought they would be safe. We chose a small town in Massachusetts thinking it would be out of the way. But we didn't realize how conservative the town was. They'd tell my children that I'd drowned babies in the pond in my backyard, that I was a murderer. This from people who considered themselves pro-life.
I've seen Bill Baird in television appearances. And on occasion, I have felt a chill go through my blood.
I feel a chill when I think of the way you've treated me.
I sense a tangible presence of evil in Bill Baird.
So evil that I would sacrifice my family's help, my family's safety, to help your mothers and daughters and wives live. Yes, I was unwelcome. But I won the Supreme Court case, Baird versus Eisenstadt, and it made birth control available to everyone. It's in the history books. All I ask is that people remember what I did for them.
Bill Baird won Baird versus Eisenstadt in 1972, but now has been left behind and diminished in importance. He has alienated leaders on both sides. Dr. Alan Guttmacher.
The Planned Parenthood League feels it can live with the present law. Bill Baird's efforts are an embarrassment to the group, and there is nothing to be gained by action of his kind. Off the record, I can tell you we aren't supporting that man because we have worked hard to be respected by the community. We work within the laws so that we can ensure it's the best way to do our jobs. Don't stir up trouble and don't call attention. Would we like for birth control to be accessible to everyone? Sure, but we cannot in our current position. We have to be careful who we associate ourselves with.
In her book, Going Too Far, Robin Morgan suggested Mr. Baird's mission was an effort to get women to sleep with him, and she called him
one of the more male supremacist men around.
My whole motive in this is to get women to sleep with me. There must be an easier way than going to jail, getting death threats, and having rocks thrown at me. My philosophy is a very simple one. It's just loving people and sincerely caring for them. I grew up in poverty. One of the things my mother taught me is to remember that man who falls by the wayside and stubs his toe. And I always try to reach out and help him up.
Gloria Steinem, like many of her colleagues, has refused to shake his hand. Betty Friedan has called him irrelevant and insinuated that he is a CIA agent.
Some people think that righteousness is measured by money, by bloated bank accounts. It's obscene for anyone to be paid $200,000 a year and call themselves a crusader. As Thoreau said, he who gives himself entirely to his fellow men appears to them useless and selfish. But he who gives himself partially to them is pronounced a benefactor and philanthropist. Being a crusader, I measure it by commitment, by dedication, by success. I live on $350 a week. Look what I've done with nothing. Imagine what I could do with Planned Parenthood's budget. I am the only American in modern times who is a prisoner of the United States government for advocating the public's right to birth control.
So Bill Baird did so much and took his case to the Supreme Court. Why was he so controversial within the women's movement? I mean, why did so many feminists reject him? It doesn't make sense.
I think some people felt, especially at the beginning of the women's movement, protected. At the time, with women disclosing very private information to one another, it felt valuable to create a space of our own. You can understand our hesitation with welcoming men into our community. We were fighting to assert ourselves and become women who could make choices on our own and defend ourselves. The men who wanted to help were well-meaning, perhaps, but it was counter to what we wanted to accomplish. A large part of it was Betty Friedan's book, The Feminine Mystique. We began thinking about the roles of motherhood and marriage. We spent so much time and money getting a college education. And for what? Most of our mothers didn't go beyond the home. It seemed that Friedan was saying something very true. Women are skilled and talented, and we were limiting ourselves. And I know that Betty Friedan had trouble with Bill Baird.
I began to be suspicious that the women's movement was being infiltrated, which may sound paranoid, but wasn't really at the time. It was an era of great suspicion about everything and everybody, and the leadership of now was certainly not immune. It was at a wild conference in New York in 1969 that my suspicions were born. I had persuaded the National Board to forego our next meeting and to organize a Congress instead in New York, which had a terrific turnout. The women of the Congress voted to close the meeting to both men and the media. We were meeting behind locked doors of a public school, but somehow Bill Baird and the male television crew managed to break in, prompting a group of young women studying karate to physically eject them. It was mayhem. The young woman next to me said, "If you were a CIA agent trying to break up the movement, wouldn't this be just the way to do it?"
I will never understand how you thought I was with the CIA. They were targeting me. Everywhere I went, in my van or to speak, I was met by government agents. And I was doing it for you. And you never thanked me, never welcomed me. I gave up so much for you, and you didn't want anything to do with me. Why am I left out of all the textbooks? Why have I been left out of all the studies? No one talks about me. No one recognizes what I contributed.
I don't understand. If you did so much for women, why don't we hear about them? I think it's important that we know how we got this
You
far.
didn't see it. They thought he was so egotistical and that he was trying to take over and vie for the spotlight. He thought he was being perfectly reasonable. He never saw how confrontational he was. The major irony is that adoption takes people like that to make social change. Almost every major historical figure who's brought about radical change had a problematic personality. Had men such as Bill Baird taken a back seat in our movement, our strides in overturning discriminatory laws would not have happened.
Sexism has hurt our movement and dissuaded many qualified men from joining the pro-choice movement. It's sexist that women don't want me to get involved. We need to root out our sexism with our own movement. Does anyone have a right to be suspicious of my work after all this time? I'm tired of it. I'm tired.
March 22nd, 1972. The U.S. Supreme Court, in a ringing victory for birth control advocate William Baird, struck down a controversial Massachusetts statute banning the sale of contraceptive to single persons. In the case of Eisenstadt versus Baird, the High Court, in a 6-1 opinion, with Chief Justice Warren E. Berger dissenting, held that a state cannot deny birth control devices to a single person if it permits them for married persons. Said Justice William Douglas,
The teaching of Bill Baird and Galileo may be of a different order, but the suppression of either is equally repugnant.
and in the decision, Justice William Brennan said,
If the right to privacy means anything, it's the right of the individual, married or single, to be free from unwarranted governmental intrusion in matters so fundamentally affecting a person as the decision to bear or beget a child.
The following year, 1973, would see the passage of Roe versus Wade. Eisenstadt versus Baird would be cited 5 times in the decision.
1998, the Brown University ACLU presents the Bill Baird Eternal Vigilance Award to Bill Baird, social reformer and civil
2000,
libertarian.
the Oklahoma affiliate of NAREL presents the NAREL Courage Award to Bill
for
Baird
equality,
in gratitude for his many years of
freedom, and
unwavering
human dignity.
dedication
It is
and
time.
pioneering
Now,
leadership.
activists
tearing down
and the
the
public
barriers
understand the
to
real
reproductive
story
freedom
behind
and
how
his
the rights to birth
extraordinary
control
courage
and
in
abortion
providing
were won.
reproductive
I am
health care to
continually
women in the face
surprised
of
by the
overwhelming
revisionism of
opposition
some
and
who
at
are
great
unwilling to
personal
give
risk.
credit to people who have had a major impact on our freedom. Dear editor, I am Jane Roe of the 1973 U.S. Supreme Court abortion decision. Bill Baird is one of the true pioneer leaders of our struggle. He has been an inspiration to us all for decades. He has been a victim of sexism and discrimination many times by so-called feminists. There are many leaders, including myself, who would be honored to march side by side with him. He is a true crusader. Sincerely, Norma McCordley, AKA Jane Roe.
Women need their reproductive rights to have a genuine foundation in economic and social justice. Choice implies a marketplace of options, ignoring the fact that, especially for women of color, economic and institutional constraints often restrict their choices. Access to abortion requires nearby safe and secure clinics, willing doctors, reasonable costs, and a female-respecting staff that provide ample sex education. Many areas of our country lack these.
Roe versus Wade was a tremendous victory, much to my surprise, because I considered it a very conservative court. But time is not on our side. Unless we become more aggressive, you will witness the death of this abortion law in a couple of years. Social reformers get weary and frightened, but a voice within me keeps reminding me to think of that woman with the coat hanger. From Thoreau's Civil Disobedience. If the injustice is part of the necessary friction of the machine of government, let it go. Let it go. Perchance it will wear smooth. Certainly the machine will wear out. If the injustice has a spring, or a pulley, or a rope, or a crank exclusively for itself, then perhaps you may consider whether or not the remedy would be worse than the evil. But if it is as such a nature that it requires you to be the agent of injustice to another, then I say break the law. Let your life be a counter-friction to stop the machine.
Either you will go through this door, or you will not go through.
From Prospective Immigrants, please take note, by Adrian Rich.
If you go through, there is always a risk of remembering your name.
Things look at you doubly, and you must look back and let them happen.
If you do not go through, it is possible to live worthily.
To maintain your attitudes, to hold your position, to die bravely.
But much will blind you, much will evade you. At what cost, who knows?
The door itself makes no promises. It's only a door.
There also were some artists and individuals who did quite a bit. And I really want to, in a very short period of time, tremendously short period of time, this project as a play, as a show, it didn't exist before September of this year. It's all taken place in the semester. And I really want to acknowledge the MSA graduate student playwrights from the English department who wrote the piece. That's Jeannie Hogue and Madeline Fitch. Advisor Tanya Fernando, right next to them over there. In addition to the great actors who you saw on stage, off stage in the theater department, there's the director, Sean LeCount. I see him up there. Dramaturg Emily Dennison. Emily. There was somebody else. dramaturg, the ballet's dramaturg, and related by marriage to one of the dignitaries up here on stage, Len Berkman has been involved. I would say maybe the chief force and powerhouse behind everything, sort of artistic director and producer, historian, scholar, and publicity director all rolled into one, Joyce Berkman. Right what we're going to do now is have a discussion, not so much a traditional kind of talk back, or critique session, response session about the work itself, but really a critical discussion and an interaction about some of the issues raised in this, I think, really interesting play that's so chock full of history. And so to help facilitate that process, we have two local experts on our faculty. We have Joyce Berkman. I've already mentioned her, but in addition to being behind this project, Joyce is a professor in the history department. She's written many books. She's been a Fulbright scholar, and her specialty is women's history. So Joyce is here to offer her expertise. And along with Joyce, we're also lucky to have another professor in the history department, Laura Lovett. Laura's specialty is gender, race, and family in 20th century America. She has a book recently published called Conceiving the Future, Pronatalism, Reproduction, and the Family in the United States. She's also the director of the Five College Women's Studies Research Center. So they're going to help to contribute to this discussion. And actually, Bill Baird himself is going to join us on stage in a few minutes after we get the discussion going. I do understand that Joyce has something additional she'd like to say before that.
I just want to honor a couple of other people. First of all, Harley has been amazing. When this idea, the light went on, I knew the two people I knew best initially in the department were Harley and Julian. And I approached them with this idea, and they were so positive and responsive. And then, of course, others very quickly participated as well, enthusiastically. The theater department's been extraordinary, but Harley has been my point person throughout the process, and the mentor for Emily Dennison, who's been the dramaturg. And just to clarify the infrastructure of this sort of situation is, Bill Baird has an immense amount of documents in his basement. There is so much writing out there for research and for exploration. Emily took a lot of that material and funneled it to the two extraordinary writers who have only had a month to put the script together. Almost any project of this nature, documentary theater, requires at least a year. This is truly quite remarkable, and Emily had a major role, and Emily studies with Harley. So just to keep the lineage pretty clear about what happened here. So we owe a great deal to Emily and Harley. I also want to say that my colleague here, Laura Lovett, Laura had invited Bill to talk to her class in 20th century U.S. women's history when I was also teaching a course on the history of reproductive rights in the United States. And she suggested, why don't we just join our classes together to hear Bill, which we did, and he was spectacular. We were just spellbound by what he had to say. And when we went out for lunch afterwards, which we did, the idea came about a docudrama, and Laura has been very supportive of the idea and played a very important part in the early phase of this project. And I also want to thank the researchers. There are just a bunch of names in your program. For me, each of them have contributed immeasurably to the success of this project. These are graduate students in history, plus a senior honors thesis, Ella here, and they've gone to Bill's house, they've worked with the documents, they've supplied them to Emily. We also have a historian of the project. That's Kim Fuller here, who's attended, I don't know how many meetings, and attended all the rehearsals. There have been 4 rehearsals for this presentation to you. She attended each of them Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday night, and will ultimately write an account of a collaborative process. It's a form of public history, it's a part of performance theory, and we're very pleased about that. We also have a web designer who is mentioned in the program too. I may be missing other people, but I just want to say that I am so thrilled by an experience of this kind that's profoundly interdisciplinary, every bit collaborative, Indeed, even maritally collaborative, as Harley indicated. So thank everybody. I really thank you all, and really everybody here. And you as an audience, in fact, now are becoming part of a collaborative process.
One opening thought or question maybe either or both of you could reflect on. And this really jumped out at me watching the students rehearse and hearing them engage with the material. And actually how little is known about not just the story of Gilbert, but actually the whole struggle for reproductive rights in the 50s and 60s and 70s. There's a lot of focus on Roe v. Wade. That's sort of become an iconic, symbolic moment, depending on where you stand. We know where we stand, yes. But relative to the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement in the 1960s, this whole moment, this whole movement for reproductive rights, which is tied to that obviously, has sort of been effaced a lot from public consciousness, I think from the consciousness of a younger generation. And I was alive but relatively young myself during that time, and it's a lot of this information in this play was also new to me as well. So I'm just wondering why that might be the case, and the play raises these questions and starts to address them, but I think raises big questions about that. I'm wondering whether either of you might want to comment on that.
Maybe I'll start first. I want to also stress that this is a discussion, so at any point, I'm sure Harley would like to see any hands, any questions, any thoughts on your part about this. Some of you may have been involved as active participants in the movement, in the state, and in the area, so you may have thoughts and stories to share. And in fact, before I even respond, I want to point out a book by David Klein, edited, called Creating Choice, which was used by the writers. This is the story of people who broke the law, who engaged in civil disobedience in this area between 1965 and Roe v. Wade, to see that young people would have access to contraceptives and to abortion. It's the clergy who were involved with the Clergy Consultation Service, a number of doctors, including Dr. Gage of University Health Services, a variety of figures in politics and society who run organizations, and they're critical to the story as well of the change that has taken place in this area. So I do want to alert you to this particular volume of excerpts from oral histories that were sponsored under a graduate course that I taught and the Valley Women's History Collaborative in the Valley. So in response to your question, several thoughts come to mind, and I look forward to Laura's supplementing, qualifying, whatever. If you put yourself back to the late 1960s, before most people knew even about the women's movement, people were preoccupied with the war and with civil rights. And sexual freedom for women, which did not involve men burning draft cards and all that, seemed to be of lesser importance. And it took back burner to these compelling movements for ending the war and for bringing about racial justice. That's one part of the story. It begins to change as the women's movement gains momentum in the 70s, by the time we get to 72, even 73. But during the 60s, we're talking about the mid and late 60s. Second, and maybe this may be easier for those who are over 60 to understand than those younger, abortion and contraception are taboo topics. A young woman, or even a married woman, who would associate themselves politically and in the public with seeking abortion rights, with talking about types of contraceptives and using that, would be looked upon as probably promiscuous. There would be all kinds of stereotypes to which she might be subjected. These are conversations you had privately with your closest friends, if you could trust them that you were pregnant and tell them you were pregnant. And many, many women, as we saw, couldn't do that. You have to keep in mind what an incredibly taboo topic, particularly in Massachusetts. And this is 1960s, it's not 1990s. So we're dealing with that factor and why it would not receive the attention that maybe other movements and other individuals and people might have. And then there's the factor of the women's movement itself. And when it takes off, it splits into both a very mainstream a liberal version that you get with the National Organization for Women, and you get with a number of other organizations in which the leadership indeed needs to feel it can draw on a huge population of women, create a wide consensus for its large agenda for gender change, and felt it could not risk its respectability by getting associated with radical civil disobedience. The other part of the women's movement, which is the radical wing of the began having in New York speak-outs on abortion. Young women were brave enough to say, I had an abortion, and this is what I experienced. But that was considered, it's difficult to capture how dramatic and outrageous and challenging that moment in time is that began the speak-outs. And that was in New York, a much more progressive state. It wasn't happening the same way in Massachusetts. And of course, New York decriminalized contraception and abortion earlier than Massachusetts. So we have a kind of split among feminists depending on what strategies they believe in, what objectives, and many of them, as the script suggested, did not want to get associated with a civil disobedience, radical activity, and this is a long history in women's history that Laura could go back, Victoria Woodhull and even earlier, in which the more, might say, risk-taking individuals who are really pushing the boundaries of accepted norms were looked upon as threatening the mainstream of the movement and bringing about change. So that would be where I would go with the question.
I would actually chime in a little bit about the way that we think of stories and the history of movements. And the fact that I was thinking there are three different kinds of movements, right, that we often sort of codify in the way that we tell these histories of movements. One of them is a rights-based push for legal rights and claims for position. The other is movement history, right, the grassroots struggles of different individuals who work together and work to change things. And the other is the personal. And I think especially with the women's movement and with this issue, the personal becomes the political, and that's such a radical rethinking of how we even conceive of the story of a movement, and is the context really sort of clarifies how risky it is to change the way we tell those stories. So.
Right. It's a very interesting then to attempt to do a kind of, well, this piece is, we have a personal story down here with the mother and the daughter, but we also have maybe both of those other elements of history represented in some way. I'm thinking just off the top of my head about that sort of triangle that you articulated. So I'm wondering whether, so we do want to make this as interactive as possible, as Joyce said. I'm sure there's questions or comments, so we're going to turn things right over to folks in the audience.
So in the play, the role of civil disobedience plays a very big part. And so I'd like to know from the historians and from Bill, was the text civil disobedience sort of a motivational factor in the 1960s? And was it a motivational factor for Bill Baird, or was it a good way of moving the story along in the play?
Yeah. Why don't we have Bill? Bill, there's a seat for you, so Bill Baird.
First of all, I want to thank you all for letting me share tonight with you. It's the first time in my 45 years of fighting that the public has finally even gotten a glimpse of how tough this fight has been. And that is a story in itself. When you ask about civil rights, I was clinical director of a drug company, so I knew nothing about civil rights other than what I read about. However, I knew the laws were wrong, but I also knew somebody had to fight them. How do you fight them? So the first thing I thought of, go to the power people, the people with money, like Planned Parenthood. And I don't know if this was brought out or not, but Planned Parenthood's literature said abortion took the life of a child. Most of you don't know that. They were opposed to abortion. Their literature, which is in my possession, said birth control was for married people only. And I was of the belief that you're a human being. All of us have rights, regardless of marital status, and that should be a simple factor to consider. So after I decided that nobody was going to do anything. I thought I would fight the law. And when you mentioned New York law, you probably don't know this name, but Percy Sutton was Assemblyman of New York. Percy Sutton heard me speak before the Democratic caucus, and he sent me a letter. He said, based on what you had said and how you motivated me, I submitted, at that time it was called the Percy Sutton Bill, to repeal the law on birth control. And since I was the one who helped organize it, the law got changed after I was arrested. But after the law got changed, the right-wing judges said, well, Bill Baird, change the law, but you're going to still stand trial. Same law that I had helped change. So that angered me. And then along came New Jersey, and they were going to jail unwed mothers under the charge of fornication as a way of holding down welfare costs. So I wanted to teach these mothers birth control, and this time I was convicted and put in jail for 20 days. So all these were acts of civil disobedience in retrospect. Suppose this young man, Ray Mungo, called me and said, Bill, would you come to our state? When I read your law, that's a 10-year jail term. Think with me for a moment. Would you risk 10 years in jail to go to my home state in New York to challenge a law that if you won, the people benefit? If you lose, you will only go to prison. And by the way, since you know you're going to be headed to the Supreme Court, you lay out the 200 grand of your own money. Would you do that? And I said, no. I refused. But then Ray called me back several times, and I thought about the woman who died. I said, well, maybe if the Supreme Court would hear me, which was not brought out in the play. My hope was that the right of privacy would extend not just for birth control, not just for abortion, but believe it or not, I filed the first bill for gay people. Gay people had rights. There's a very famous case called Florence v. Texas, 2003, where they quoted me 5 times, the right of privacy. So when we, again, to bring up to a conclusion, sum up civil rights, I wasn't smart enough to know about these things. All I knew is somehow there was a law and injustice. Somehow somebody had to blast through that. And I didn't know anybody would do it. And I thought I could do it. And when they talk and play at Bodman, they said egotistical. If you don't believe in yourself, that's not egotism. You've got to believe in yourself. And I asked you if I can give you one gift, because you're all so young. You have a gift. Believe in yourself. Wherever you go, whether it be an actor, an actress, a college professor, whatever it is, set that goal and tell yourself, I can do it. And I set the goal. Think of this. Planned Parenthood said, Bill Baird is an embarrassment. That came out of left field. Nothing to be gained by his case. They didn't want to know me. ACLU took the case. 3 weeks later said, you're no value to us. We decided we're going to drop it. What didn't come out, the National Organization for Women said, if William Baird's name was Wilhelmina Baird, we'd back him. All these groups said, get lost. And I said to my inner soul, not egotism, but belief. I will march forward. I will go forward. And I will destroy a law that's destroying women. So that's how that came about.
Do either of you want to have any thoughts on that question on civil disobedience and Thoreau? I know you weren't one of the playwrights, but there was a question.
Well, first.
I'm still thinking about Wilhelmina.
You know, the 1960s is famous for civil disobedience. I mean, it was happening here all over the place, but not in the sphere of sexuality. You know, you'd have Stonewall, you'd have moments in gay history, but on the whole, it was on the grassroots. Ordinary people were using birth control. Ordinary people were having abortions. They were, in a sense, doing the civil disobedience without calling it civil disobedience. But that wasn't changing any laws. It wasn't changing any policies. Until organizations form, huge organizations of grassroots support, can you truly bring about a change in the law and in the norms, hopefully, and not just through the daily behavior, which was civil disobedience. I feel very strongly a point made in the play, and that is, if the issue was as, and excuse me males in the audience for saying this, if it was as central to male sexual expressivity, to male sexual happiness, to have birth control, but it's not necessary because men don't become pregnant, we would have seen much more civil disobedience, much more support for Bill than took place in the late 60s. That's an interpretation I have, and it's one that I think is unfortunately corroborated by a lot of women who in fact felt that they're getting back, were not asserting themselves, were not having the self-confidence that they had as much a right to demand contraception and abortion as a man had the right to commit civil disobedience against a war they didn't believe in and to burn their draft cards. I don't see any difference in the level of right involved here, and too many women did not have that feeling, and they certainly didn't get that support from men on the left who tended to feel that they had to prove their virility and subordinated this as an issue.
There's also a way in which, and I think the play brought this out, the language, well, the role of medicalized rationalization for disobedience, right? The way in which you could have a therapeutic abortion, and the way in which the medical community in some ways framed the narrative itself around abortion. That in fact, the dire situation of women who would risk their lives, right, or lose their lives. And so the appeal, this is a very traditionally gendered, right, the appeal to wanting to protect those women from doing that harm to themselves and moving it into a language of rights is a radical move, I think.
I'd just like to give you another thought. And the thought is this. Dick Joyce spoke about organizations, and it's very important. I'm not an organization guy. I'm a guy who believes if the right of privacy means anything, the right of the individual, not the organization, the right of the individual to be free. So as an individualist, I found groups a pain in the neck. I found groups like Planned Parenthood who were very concerned about their budget. Their at that time, $200 grand a year salary. This year, their director gets $1 million per year. That's not a movement, that's big business. And big businesses are interested in preserving big businesses. A guy like me comes along, took away my family, separated me from it, put me in jail 8 times, firebombed my clinic, tried to destroy my reputation every way possible. One of the things that didn't come out, one of the reasons my children are up in this state, in New York I was arrested on a morals charge. Headline of the Boston Globe said, Crusader arrested on a morals charge with a baby. Huntington, Long Island, which is an African community, gave a speech before now. Little baby sat on her mother's lap. And the police contended the baby saw a diaphragm, which I showed in my lecture. They said, anyone, you laugh, hear me. It's scary stuff. When suddenly you hear a woman scream, and she's on the floor being pinned down by the police being handcuffed. And the next thing when I'm looking, I'm on the floor being handcuffed. And they're claiming that the baby was a minor under 18 that saw a diaphragm and would get sexual ideas. My little children, one of them was 2 here today, were told they would be put to death. My first wife said, man, I can't handle this. And she was right. So we moved them up here where I thought they were safe. I remained in New York. And believe it or not, people across this nation sent letters accusing me of every kind of debauchery with a child. Finally, of course, we won the case. We won $8,000. And I used that $8,000 for false arrest. I set up the Bill Baird Catholic Police Abortion Fund. Catholic with a small C means universal. And all the cops were Catholic. And I was just tweaking their nose. And I do this. So the difference is sometimes when I said about a message for your life, you don't have to go along with groups. Sometimes groups get in the way. Sometimes board of directors have a fantastic time sitting down telling you how great they are. And they think they've accomplished something. But if you're the rugged individual who say, look, no matter what arrows you throw at me, no matter what you do, I will march forward. I'll be true to that cause of freedom and justice. And that's how I've led my life. That doesn't mean at the age of 76, said, man, I must have hit on the wrong side of the head one day because I don't know why I did some of the things I did, the advice I did, because at this age, I wish I had a lot easier. In fact, my little commercial, if any one of you can help me get heard speaking before your campus or any other campus. See, one of the things why you didn't know about this is I've really been silenced. This is the ugly part of the movement. People like Ellie Smeel, Betty Friedan, all of them, I don't exist. Remember you heard the Charles Street Jail? I don't know if you know this, it's been closed down, but it's now changed to Liberty Hotel. $500 a night. All I ask you is go into that hotel, and there's a big picture of me in the lobby. One of the famous criminals. But here's the kicker. They told me that every room now they have this fancy smelling body lubricant with a box of condoms. The very thing they put me in jail for, they said. So all I want to encourage you is you get me to get this message heard. I wish this play really moved me to tears, truly to tears. I was embarrassed, my daughter seeing me weep. But I wish this play could be shown across the country. I told the young man who played me that, I didn't tell him this yet, but History Channel, they called me last week. They wanted to do a story on me. And I said, boy, this is a great chance for a young man like this to get discovered, and the whole group of them, that when I talk to them next, I'm going to find out their names, say, hey, you got a great staff here, get them involved. If I could get this play shown, not just here, but across the country, it would be one of the great educational tools. Because most of you, honest with me, you knew about Roe v. Wade. Some of you even knew about the case out of Connecticut, but most of you never heard of Dept v. Eisenstadt, and there's a reason for it. The women's group said, we don't want you to know that a male could be sensitive to women. And with due respect to Joyce, who I love, there's lots of women who are angry with women. You know, do you know who heads the Right to Life group? Dr. Wanda Friends, a woman. January 22nd, there's a march every year in Washington, headed by Nellie Gray. Women Concerned for America, headed by women. There are women who are opposed to women, and there are men who fight for women. It's not sex. It's not. It's where your head comes from. If you really believe in freedom, I don't care if you're white, black, or polka dot, or male or female, or gay or straight. If you believe in freedom as I do, you march forward with a banner of freedom and justice for all. That's what loving one another means. My young daughter's here, but I've turned away from religion, and they're quite religious, and I support their right. Because I've seen how religion can be really mean. You know, when they tell women that birth control is evil, and women are murderers, I can't forgive them for that. So I think if you have a faith of loving people, don't talk about it. I could have talked about it, said you had rights from my home in New York. You would never have had Dept v. Eisenstadt. But if you say, yeah, I'll put myself on the line, I'll march, I'll do what is necessary for freedom. Don't talk about it, do it.
If there's any other, there must be some more questions, comments? Yes.
Well, actually, we started down this road now. There's a question I had. In a sense, I understand the position of, say, now and other groups, and now, Mr. Guard, I understand your position a little bit better now, too. But I'm just wondering, especially perhaps for Joyce and Laura to explain what changed between 1972 and, say, 1998, say, at Brown University. Is it just simply setting the record straight, or does it speak more to perhaps changes within the movement itself, or the cultural setting, I don't know, further development, maturation process, or how would you explain this change between 1972 and now 1998 and today?
You mean the change to the increasing popular acceptance of both contraception and abortion?
No, I mean in terms of the
story. In terms of Bill Baird? Yeah. Oh, sure.
I think the story is now. You know, when you're in the midst of battles, and some people, you know, felt like they were really in the midst of a battle to protect or to actually even establish the right to say something, you kind of draw lines, you make decisions, and you push a certain narrative. And one of the roles, you know, the role of actually moving people was not just in terms of challenging the law, but in getting people to learn how to speak out and how to learn how to occupy a political space. The consciousness-raising groups, the sort of groups that actually allowed women to begin to test what they could say and what they could do and how they could imagine themselves and their rights as political, really meant that, yeah, there were a lot of lines drawn. I think as things have shifted, we're a generation later almost, and we're beginning to tell that history. We're only just starting. I think there have been just a couple of, this book is actually one of the first to come out, and it came out of this valley and the work in this valley, but it's only now that we've begun to collect those stories and to get the chance to reflect. It's also been, of course, hard fought.
Yeah, and I'd say that it reflects indeed the major advances of the women's movement. That is, when women across the country, and men too, put the dots together, that the ability for women to earn wages and to pursue careers and to be active politically in the same way as men required fertility control. To go on to go to medical school and law school all those years, you weren't going to stay a virgin if you were involved in heterosexual romance. That is, putting together the pieces of the women's agenda to gain equal opportunities in this country required fertility control. And when that was really understood as a due process of law issue, as well as a privacy right issue, which happened somewhere in the 70s, later, and grows, we can see then an appreciation for fighters' individual and group efforts that paved the way and contributed to this happening. Before people can see that connection, then it's very difficult to write a narrative. I mean, I think Laura's absolutely right, that it's often, as you know from your own work, if men who fought in World War I were unable to write the history of that traumatic years until at least 10 years later, and even then, the revisionist accounts that kept rolling forth and continue to roll forth. And there's going to be continued revision and rewriting of the history of reproductive rights. But it's the increasing awareness of its place within the vast social transformation of women and families that a new perspective could grow, and to appreciate the efforts of someone, the campaigning, the crusading of Bill, and to see the role of both the individual and the group, that it's two, it's not one or the other, that it often takes incredibly brave individuals to challenge legal situations, and then it takes enormous amount of grassroots efforts to change public mentalities.
I can just mention one thing. This is important to me. History, to me, has to be written in granite. It is not in this movement. I'll give you a quote you heard tonight. Betty Friedan says in her book how Bill Baird in 1969, the building was locked, the school was locked, and how he broke into the building with the male TV crew. I want you to think with me. A locked school building is what she claims. How do you break into a school building if it really happened? Did I take a sledgehammer and smash the door down? That's an absolute lie. Did you hear what I said? An absolute lie. Yet that's being repeated, and that's what you've got to be careful of. When you see stuff written about a history of a movement, I'll give you a name. Professor Celia Bashofsky wrote a book called Women on the Defensive a couple years ago. In the book, she said, direct quote, Planned Parenthood bravely challenged the law in Massachusetts, bravely gave out birth control to the audience. Case was called, according to the book, Baird v. Eisenstadt. I called up this professor and said, Professor, I think you made an error. I'm Bill Baird. I challenged the law. I fought the law. I'm the guy who went to jail. Planned Parenthood opposed me. She says, I am a professor. Due respect. I'm a professor. She says, I stand by my research. Are you no, not a professor.
We don't have the halos.
And she hung up on me. There are people who believe that. Up until recently, most people think that Roe v. Wade was by itself. Remember, I risked 10 years in jail, not for a joke. I had a goal. If I could knock out the law on birth control, knock out the law on abortion, the right of privacy, knock out the laws on fornication. I don't know if you know this. If you fornicated in this state, 6 months in jail for each act. Some of you one lost week can be a lifetime in jail. So all I tried to do was to poke fun at the law. Great, but when you don't have money, you have humor. And I was tweaking the nose of the cops. Because if I didn't get arrested, there was no bad VI stake. And I can tell you now for the first time publicly, I threw the case. Think of that. I appeared in court deliberately. I told my lawyer I wanted to lose. Because if I won, I wouldn't be headed to the Supreme Court. So I had to lose. So I gave notice that the case was 53 minutes, that's the whole trial, for a felony, which is a record. Found me guilty. So all I wanted to sum up this part is, please, and with good professor, why I love Joyce, is the fact that she's the first woman anywhere in the United States, and I've addressed thousands and thousands of audiences, who ever said, you know, this story should be told, which is why I'm here. It brought tears to my eyes. Why at the age of 76, and she knows it, fighting cancer, I should share this with you. The Charles Street Jail is right next to the Massachusetts General Hospital, where I'm being treated for cancer. 8 weeks of radiation treatment. I cannot tell you what it did to my soul to be almost naked alongside the very place where I was abused. It still tortures me, still. And the only reason I tell you this, because I'm a great believer that we are, with due respect to my children, we are each other's family member. You are part of my family. If you really believe that, I don't believe in this blood relatives. We are part of the human family. And we do that by reaching out to each other and caring for one another.
Well, first of all, my gratitude to Bill for living this story and to this collaborative for bringing it to light. I think there may be an irony in the making here in that if this story does get put out in a wider place and a wider stage, that the women's movement may be called upon to begin to question the silence that has continued. The taboo may have gone down a notch or two, but the silence has continued. And, you know, and I guess just right in this second, what I'd like to do is break that silence myself by just saying that I had an abortion in 1970 and had to go to New York from South Carolina. I lived this story. But in my circles and with my best friends, we talk about it, but in a group of women, we still don't talk about it. This would be such a gift to have this begin to make this a wider conversation and push the narrative forward. So that's the irony that I think maybe in the works
thank
here.
you very much for that comment, because that's very much on your comment about 15 years ago, one of the now retired members of my department, and it was a little earlier than that, when I said I was offering a course on history of reproductive rights, he said that's outrageous. Sex has no part in our history courses.
We wouldn't be here about it. Two things. I wondered whether, I'm very familiar with this David Klein's book, in which one of my obstetrician in the 1950s and 60s was in that book. And so I just wondered if Bill Blair had a connection with some of the people in that book. The other thing I would like to comment on is that in the 1970s, or early 1970s, or the end of 69, the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts they passed a decision that they had in favor of the reproductive decisions of women should be between her and her doctor before Roe v. Wade. And so there were some other, women and I don't know if you have that, in your research or not.
That's all. It's here. Actually, there were in Massachusetts an active underground, and that's all very clear with doctors like Dr. Searsma and many others, and an active organizational underground. feminists and people who may not have identified as feminists, but who are committed to reproductive rights, a mix of groups of people who were very much involved. And as you know, but I think the problem is it was underground. To highlight, to epitomize how underground, the Amherst group helping women get abortions in 1970 in New York did not know that there was a Springfield group doing the same thing. How many miles away are this? This is how secret everything had to be, how hush-hush, how dangerous the time was. I mean, that Bill, this is what's so extraordinary about Bill's story, is that he saw the reality, he named the reality, and he was willing to challenge the privatization of all that information.
I think it's important you have to hear this, that where you mentioned these groups, the clergy groups, there was a difference from night and day, from they and myself. It was called the Clergy Consultation Group. You are familiar with the magazine called Sepia. It's a black magazine, and I've shown it to a class many times. On the cover, it says, if you want an abortion, call clinic number, my clinic. It was a 4-page story. The date of that magazine, if you remember, was July 1967. Why am I stressing 67? Was it legal in 67? It was a 10-year judgment. I was public. All these other groups who didn't know about each other were very secret. I wasn't. I got on TV shows like Joe Pine, Alan Burke, Mike Douglas, and I said, the law be damned. Don't use a coat hanger. Don't take a douching bag. Fill it with Lysol, with bleach, with turpentine. Don't let your husband beat you, or boyfriend, to try to get you to self-abort. Come to me. I'll help you free. I have people from every single state, Canada, South America, because no matter what they did to me, I had police chiefs, senators, poor people, rich people. They didn't know where to go either. So I had a whole underground that was above ground. But the reason I survived without being jailed, every prominent senator, every prominent police chief, I would have them fill out that says, I came to Bill Wade voluntarily, was charged no fee, and whatever I did making this decision was my personal decision. I would tell them, look, I have your record here. If we ever get raided, I can't guarantee I'm protecting your name. What they didn't know, I took all those records that night, put them in an envelope, and mailed them out of state to a friend who hid them. So if we ever got raided, they never would have been found out. But they didn't know that. So anytime the police were going to come after me, these others stood in the way and protected me.
Do you have any insights into the collaboration between physicians and pharmacists in Massachusetts in the 1950s to provide birth control in an underground way? Was that common? Was it unique to Massachusetts?
No, it wasn't unique to Massachusetts. There was a lot of birth control. In many states, birth control was not criminal in the 50s. Many states had decriminalized it, at least for married people, and some states had decriminalized it for both married and single. So there wouldn't be an issue. But in Massachusetts and in states where it wasn't, there were a number of doctors who were able to use their medical privilege with pharmacies to provide what was necessary. Margaret Sanger had, dealt with a lot of this in the 20s and 30s. So, and particularly during the Depression, there was a kind of less surveillance, more police, held back because of the issues of poverty and unemployment and so forth. But there was a lot of collusion. Statistically, I couldn't begin to gauge, but yeah.
Well, we were one of the statistics.
You were one of the statistics. Oh, one. At the doctor and the pharmaceutical.
Go to the doctor and get the prescription. And it's diaphragm fitted, and he provided it. We couldn't get it.
Oh, wonderful. Congratulations. For those of us who share that. Let me just say that right now, you may know there are many renegade pharmacists who will not provide morning after pills and various things that are permitted in the state of Massachusetts, and who give a young woman hell. She comes in to want to buy the morning after pill. We're still living, this was what was also, I appreciate the playwrights doing this, and Bill has been speaking about this a great deal. We still live in a period of time where reproductive rights are far from secure. Something like 82% of the counties in the United States do not have an abortion provider. Contraceptives remain difficult for many people to get hold of. So it's not like that was once upon a time in the 1960s and 70s. We're watching the steady erosion of all kinds of opportunities, or the failure to develop opportunities for people to control their procreation and to be able to enjoy sexuality without fear.
Well, also education. One of the things that happened after Roe v. Wade is you begin to shift the nature of medical training. And so instead of it being a sort of normative part of a doctor's training, right, because you might be on a board and somebody might in a hospital and need one, you begin to specialize. And so we're actually at a moment where medical schools do not teach abortion as a standard part of education. And in fact, it's becoming along the lines of what they've used to sort of reject the morning after pill. You can now have medical students, and I think medical schools that can reject the idea of training anyone to safe home abortions.
Julian?
Against the backdrop of a Supreme Court whose population has shifted and placed the question of choice into an increasingly more vulnerable state, we have just elected a president, an openly pro-choice president, who has assembled a political constituency that contains large numbers of people who are opposed to choice. And an interesting narrative is occurring now. The story is yet to be written, but what he's doing is something in a large political arena, not terribly unlike what you were doing, by shifting the question from abortion to making abortion unnecessary. Now, of course, the two are closely linked. The issue of reproductive rights, birth control, and family planning. But the chapter has not yet been written, has not yet even been inaugurated, but he has begun to talk, and throughout the campaign has spoken in increasingly different ways about the question of abortion. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on this subject, because I find it fascinating to see how he's making some people uncomfortable and other people filled with hope.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a very interesting chapter. What he's pointing to, and actually Hillary Clinton did and many others, is that the reason we have many pregnancies when with young women who don't want to have pregnancies, in many cases it's a lack of quality sex education, the lack of access to contraceptives, the lack of young women trained to stand up for themselves and to be able to say no, because they have to think of themselves as having a career and future and not just a wife and mom, which is wonderful. I'm not saying just to diminish it, but that there are other choices and wonderful choices out there that young women need to have in mind too as they think about their futures. The high schools of our country are not doing this, and the junior high schools, and so putting the spotlight on improving prevention, which I think is what he's, how do we prevent, how do we deal with the poverty that drives women often to end up being pregnant? How do we deal with that poverty? How do we deal with the pronatalist pressures on so many women that they only become adult women when they have a child? What do we do about schools that don't provide the kind of health education and sex education openly, positively, and affirmatively, but talk about abstinence only, and then we have Sarah Palin and her daughter. I mean, so what we're dealing with is, I think that's the best spin I can put on what Obama is doing and wants to do, and maybe we'll succeed in creating a kind of middle ground among the less intemperate, we might say, of the pro-lifers, the more positive inclined, those who would accept contraceptives, as opposed to the pro-lifers who won't accept contraceptives. I mean, there is a division among the pro-life movement.
Again, I have a little different spin in this way. I would never call anti-abortion people pro-lifers. It makes my hair bristle. It does. I am pro-life. I've saved the lives of women. They're anti-abortion. They're anti-women. Most of them support the death penalty. Every year, my beloved wife, only woman in this country brave enough to come with me, we go to the Right to Life Convention. Think of this. 2,000 of them. We actually attend their convention, find out what their political agenda is, and they have developed a set of teenagers called Teens for Life. Most of them wear rings called secondary virgins. They found Jesus Christ and become a secondary virgin. So while we are kind of asleep with the public school system, in the Catholic schools, in the fundamentalist schools, they're teaching these kids no sex unless you're married. And we, on our pro-choice, are afraid to say, wait a minute, teenagers have got a right to have intercourse. Wow, did that just rattle some of you? And if I said to you, level with me, could you go to your teenager and say, you know what, John? I had sex before I got married. Most teenagers cannot go to their parents and say, Mom and Dad, I'm pregnant, would you sign here? Because the hypocrisy still exists within our families. Why can we not sit down with our teenage kids, and before, and talk about sexuality? Why can we not talk about birth control? When a kid looks at a diaphragm and has no idea, when I speak to high schools or colleges, what a diaphragm looks like, or young men who don't know about condoms, kids who use saran wrap and wrap that around their penis because they can't afford a condom. Well, I give a lecture called Misconceptions That Cause Conceptions. That we do not sit down and be honest. Every one of you in this room, even 76-year-olds, every one of us have a sexual drive. What we do with that sexual drive is our business. Not the business of government regulating us. Oral sex. Remember I told you I filed the first bill for gay rights in 1969. Oral sex for gays as well as straight was a 20-year jail term. Dumb, I said, dumb. No one has a right to interfere. So go back about what you said about the court. I'm not as optimistic as Joyce. We're in big trouble. Forgetting Obama. I'm not thrilled with Obama. I wanted him to win, but I'm not thrilled. He's nowhere near as aggressive as he should be about abortion and birth control. This should have been a flag wave session. They didn't. They talked about it, but they should say no. It's not fit for discussion. Women have rights. If we men had one menstrual cramp, watch how quickly we'd shut our mouth. Think about this. Men, politicians, male court. If I said to you, you talk about the court, you say, well, he's going to change the court. Who's he going to change? Stevens is 88 years of age, a moderate liberal. So if he quits, who are you going to replace him with? Another moderate liberal. So what have you gained? Chief Justice Ginsburg, battling cancer, 76. Well, look who you got. Scalia, studied to be a priest. Thomas. Who's the Chief Justice? Roberts, devout Catholic. Do you know that of the entire Supreme Court, over 50% is Roman Catholic? Do you know that the Pope has come out again threatening politicians, including judges, with excommunication? You're in for a very hard time yet to come. Unless you do what I did in the 60s. You write letters. Picket politicians who are anti. If I said to you tonight, I'll just say it very quickly, if I said to you, would you join me in a lawsuit against the Catholic Church? What would you sue the Catholic Church for? Is the Vatican a government? I'm asking, tell me, is it a government? Yes, it is, dear lady. 103.48 is the smallest government in the country. Do you know we have ambassadors appointed to the Vatican? 123 ambassadors are appointed worldwide. It is a government. Who heads the government? It's the Pope. Who appoints every bishop and cardinal? It's the Pope. What must every cardinal and bishop do to be a cardinal or bishop? They must swear an allegiance to the political agenda: anti-divorce, anti-birth control, anti-gay, anti-abortion. You don't disagree, right? How about this? Do you know we have a law called the Foreign Lobbying Act that says if you lobby for a foreign government, you must by law register as a lobbyist. I would love to file a lawsuit tomorrow in federal court to say to every cardinal, every bishop who lobbies, and they all lobby, against abortion and birth control, they must register as a lobbyist. I've been saying this for 45 years. Nobody will support it. Then when I ask you logically, tell me where I'm wrong, you scratch your head and say, wait a second, Barry. Is it a government? Yeah, it's a government. Is the Pope the head? Yep, he's the head. Do cardinals and bishops lobby? Yes, they do. What is wrong with that logic? It takes courage to be able to stand up to these. When you go home tonight, if Jehovah's Witnesses said you can't have a blood transfusion if you're in a car crash, you won't allow that. We allow the Catholic Church to say a fertilized egg is a person. That's it. I whipped that in my pocket and showed you an acorn and said, look at this oak tree. Go build a house. Thank you.
I wonder if there's maybe one more question. Mary, yes.
I thought something that you just said was really interesting. I went to a Catholic all-girls high school, and you would think, you know, because one of the big things that they pushed at the school was young women as leaders, young women as, you know, having the strength and the courage to stand up and to be their own person. But still, in each, you know, in any religion class you had, there was always a section on abortion, and it was always taught as abortion is bad. If you have an abortion, you'll be psychologically damaged. You're not going to be a good mother. You'll go to hell. And also, you know, it was, a lot of the teachers took it to such a degree where they would actually ask the whole class, who's pro-abortion, who's pro-life? Okay, those of you who are pro-abortion, here's why you're wrong. And, you know, it was commonly known in the school, the teachers admitted to it, the students knew it, everybody knew it. If teachers were to say anything about, if they mentioned the word condom in class, and the principals found out, they could be fired for that. And every year we would have our annual Don't Have Sex Talk, at which point they would have some speaker, very conservative, usually part of, some very, very conservative part of the Catholic Church, come in and tell us that we couldn't, get engaged in any sort of sexual activity or anything else, or we would be ruined and we would be bad people and we wouldn't be good women. And I thought it was it was really strange because they never let us talk about, birth control or anything like that. I found that nobody talked about it really in large circles, but there were a lot of girls who had abortions. There were a lot of girls who had gotten pregnant, and didn't really know what to do because we didn't know. We weren't taught, this is what you should do to take care of yourself. So, I don't know, I think as much as people in my generation kind of think, well, that's in the past, we don't really have to worry about abortion anymore because we all know that, it's legal and we can get birth control, it's all good. There are a lot of people who would have that all go away. There are a lot of people who will willfully teach, that's wrong. And even for me, I'm very, pro-choice, but at the same time, I have to break it down. I have to deconstruct all of those walls that were built up, growing up, going to Catholic school, saying, if you do this, you're bad.
It's not just in a kind of coercive setting. I work with an aide in Greenfield, and you can't underestimate the way in which teachers sometimes in an effort to not offend or sort of will feel that they want to be careful. And even though Massachusetts has rejected abstinence-only funding, this aide was talking about a sixth grade boy who was not allowed to present his report on the life cycle of the jellyfish. It was an illustrated picture because it involved, of course, reproduction, right, as part of the life cycle. And there had to be a note sent out, this is public school, note sent out to verify that it was okay to introduce sex, right, in the piece. see. So there's a way in which, and even you'll notice high school teachers, a lot of times, some of the more creative ones will allow students to create posters, right, displaying the kind of information about contraception or something that they might feel nervous about presenting. So even in our public schools, the effect of silencing and the effect of, I guess, the importance of speaking out and of figuring out how we can talk about these things and to continue to do so, I think can't be underestimated.
You know, so it's both private and public. And you take a look at our famous MCAS tests that teachers and students, you know, in order to qualify, to get money from the state and to show you're doing the way you're supposed to teach social studies and history, you cannot find a thing in an MCAS test that deals with the history of the human body. Anything to do with sexuality, anything to do with Roe v. Wade or Barrett versus Eisenstadt or Griswold, nothing. And these are supposed to be educating enlightened citizens of the future, and total erasure, total silencing in the MCAS and whole frameworks of training social studies teachers in our state and in most states.
This goes back to my original question about why this history has been effaced, and it seems like this is maybe a wonderful place to end. I understand there's a reception outside in the lobby to which everybody's invited if you'd like to chat more with the panelists or with Bill or with each other. And I guess mostly I really want to thank all of you for coming and staying and being part of this discussion, and Everett, Joyce, and Laura, and Bill for being part of this process.